All right, we are live. Welcome back to the Black Muse Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muse. Because of a bunch of cancellations from various different guests that I had planned, I am here solo dolo for the first time. Now, what's important about that to realize is that I don't really like doing this solo. I've never thought of myself as interesting enough to hold a show down by myself where I just talk to the camera. I've always seen that way of doing a podcast as boring. But alas, I was forced to choose between doing that, which for me is less than ideal, or not producing any content at all. And I want to like continue the momentum of producing content consistently. So I'm forced to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a current events episode, solo dolo. I got at least 4 segments that I'm going to do. And doing it solo kind of allows me to kind of take my time. So I'm going to separate them into segments. Usually I kind of do them all in one sitting and then I clip them later. I'll probably just do them in separate segments as time permits. Because I'm doing it by myself, I don't have to be accountable or respectful of another person's time. So I can do it kind of whenever I'm free. I got a lot of stuff going on today. So I'm going to do it one at a time. And that's just the way it is. There's not going to be any banter between me and somebody else, which I think is probably the most interesting aspect of my podcast. It's just going to be me talking, giving my thoughts, giving my perspective. In some sense, arguing with myself because, I got to play devil's advocate. I got to see all sides. That's kind of what I do. So that's what's going to happen today. And I don't know. Hopefully, I'll be pleasantly surprised by how it turns out because my instinct is that it's not going to be as good or as awesome as the other types of shows that I do. But maybe I'm being too harsh on myself. All right. So with that, I want to get into this first story because like I've been wanting to talk about it since I first heard about it a couple of days ago. And a lot of times I only do this on the weekends. And so a lot of times several days will go by. And in the world of news, 7 days or, several days, 5, 6, 7 days going by after a news story drops, it loses kind of its allure, its muster. People have already kind of gotten over it and moved on to the next thing. So one of the perks of doing this kind of solo thing is that I can address things pretty quickly and then be more topical and kind of more with the times. All right. So the first thing that I want to talk about is apparently Trina and Saucy Santana have dropped a new voting anthem. And the name of this voting anthem is No Voting, No Vucking. Vucking is in some sense supposed to be a euphemism for a naughty word, which refers to sexual intercourse. But the kind of basic message of both the song and the video is that participating in the voting process as a Black person is attractive. It's sexy. It's cool. It's hip. It's the kind of thing that we as a Black community value so much that we would even go so far as to withhold the sex act from those who don't participate and do what they ought to do the right thing, to do their civic duty. And there's actually an interesting line in there about involving the phrase civic duty that I'm gonna let y'all listen to. I my instincts about this is that this is a very interesting example of how well-intended things that hail usually from left, politically speaking, the left of center, uh, go awry, and they end up perpetuating toxic things in our community that are not good, even though the objective apparently is to project something positive into our culture, and that is uh, a kind of awareness or a conscientiousness about the moral imperative to participate in the voting process. It's really, really important. I like that part of it. I like that this is, I think, a failed attempt, but an attempt nonetheless. Perhaps an honest one, perhaps a naive one, but an attempt nonetheless to inculcate a sense of duty with respect to participating in the political process as a Black people who as a people, the Black community, people who are jaded, people who are in some sense aware of the history of oppression that we face in this country, and that some people, at least today in 2022, still face, or the ripple effects of which they still face. I would even argue that, and I'm not the wokest of the woke, but even I would argue that. There's a lot of trends in our society, in a lot of domains of our society, in which Black people are not doing as well by comparison to their counterparts. And so you have a kind of discourse where people right of center tend to want to blame that all on culture and some of the toxicity that I think is actually relevant and demonstrably identifiable in this video I'm about to show you. But they'll blame it all on culture and or failed Democrat policies. But I think they missed the mark with that. I think that they're not as nuanced as they could be. On the other hand, you'll have people blame it all on the white man, blame it all on white supremacy, blame it all on patriarchy, blame it all on homophobia, blame it all on transphobia, blame it all on systemic oppression, as if there's a secret cabal of rich white hetero cis white dude, old white dude somewhere who wake up every day and whisper to themselves, "How can I screw over Black people today?" Not quite how it works when you're talking about structural racism. Now, there are people left of center, and there are Black people in particular who are more careful than that. They know better. They know that's not what it is. They don't have this kind of cartoon, Saturday morning cartoon villain conception of how these things work, to be fair to them. But I think they still make a fundamental mistake, and that is using that to explain things exclusively, when it's actually a mixture of what both sides are trying to say is the exclusive reason. There's a confluence of both. There are cultural elements that interact with systemic forces that perpetuate negative things that harm our people, for sure. So acting like culture has nothing to do with it is weird, and acting like you can explain all of the aspects of culture, including but not limited to the free choices that individuals make under the conditions in which they live, and you can just chalk that up to white supremacy, is weird, because what you end up doing is you strip people, Black people in this context, of their agency, and you make it seem as though Black people aren't responsible for anything that they do because racism. And I think that's an unintended consequence of a particular kind of politicking that hails from the left. It's one of the reasons why I don't fuck with wokeness, because I think it's misguided in that way. And a lot of it comes from woke white liberals in the first place. But there are Black people who participate in it too, sometimes unknowingly perpetuating these things and unknowingly buying into, I think, untenable philosophical presuppositions when it comes to ideology. But I've been talking too much, and this is one of the things I'm afraid of, because when I'm interacting with somebody, I'm more conscientious of overdoing it. But I want to start. This is a long, lengthy introduction, but I really want to do a deep dive on this, and I want y'all to watch this video, y'all, and kind of give you an opportunity to get first impressions on it. And then I'm going to do my devil's advocate and try to see if there's any validity on both sides of this. I actually genuinely, it took me a while, but I actually genuinely think I can steel man the kind of left of center perspective on this, and why people in the Black community in particular, but people left of center generally, whether they're Black or not, think this might be a positive thing, however naive that might be. So without further ado, here is the video. It is entitled "No Voting, No Vucking." It is by Trina and Saucy Santana.
Yeah. Trey Tracks, I think we got one.
It's voting season, bruh.
No voting, no loving. No voting, no touching. No voting, no nothing. No voting, no fucking. No voting, no fucking. No voting, no loving. No voting, no touching. No voting, no nothing. No voting, no fucking. No voting, no fucking. BLK app looking for some action. Swear the homie stop what's happening. Face is a 9, abs a 10, D is a to be determined. He got mad jokes, he don't seem broke. The only red flag, he said he don't vote. This midterms for all the single cuties. Wanna hit this booty, gotta do your civic duty. No voting, no loving. No voting, no touching. No voting, no nothing. No voting, no fucking. No voting, no fucking. No voting, no loving. No voting, no touching. No voting, no nothing. No voting, no fucking. No voting, no fucking.
Don't stop now, stuff my ballot box again. But my homegirl through, put the buy in partisan. Politics be so nasty, make me wanna flirt ya. Show you how to be a poll worker. Legs in the air, I don't care. Anyone could get it, universal health care. If you wanna come before the deadline, come in the jacuzzi, gerrymander this coochie.
No voting, no love, no voting, no touch, no voting, no nothing. Can't let me down, gotta stand up for something. No voting, no loving. No voting, no touching. No voting, no nothing. BLK, we gon' stand up for something. Yeah.
So I played a lot of it, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna play the whole thing. I'm learning as I go, people. So I don't know exactly what the best formula is. I do want to comment on this, and I do want to go back to some things and stop and start and comment on very specific things. However, full transparency, I think that there's a lot that is problematic with this. I'm gonna attempt to try to see both sides, but I'm coming in this with a perspective, indeed perhaps a bias. I think that this probably does more harm than good, although I don't want to overstate the harm. I don't want to make it sound like it's going to set the black people back 100 years or some shit. But I do think that it's though I acknowledge what it's argued to be an attempt at doing, I don't think it's successful in what it's trying to do for a lot of different reasons. But I want to get into that in a second. First and foremost, Trina is still making music. Trina is someone I already have mixed feelings about because her particular brand of music is controversial to me. Full transparency, I grew up Christian, and so I think a lot of what are probably the sources of biases that I have come from that upbringing. I no longer go to church, or I'm not really particularly religious at this point, and a lot of that started around college. That was kind of the beginning of me unlearning certain kinds of theological presuppositions, let's say. But one of the things that I think continues from back in those times is that artists like Trina, who their brand entails a kind of shameless flaunting of their sexuality, and this is viewed by people left of center typically, but usually these artists themselves, as a kind of sexual liberation, a kind of free love, kind of the kind of that cultural milieu of the 60s, sex positivity, and then kind of inculcated in more contemporary kind of versions of black feminism, where women are now taking the ownership of their sexuality and their bodies for their own sake. And there's a sense of female empowerment, particularly black women, who, according to this view, have been subjugated in various different ways throughout history. And there's a lot of truth to that. But women in general have been subjugated in various different ways throughout history. I think that's obviously true. Anybody who wants to debate that can, I guess, I'll see you in the comments, I guess. But like, that's true. And to a certain extent, there are a lot of I think a lot of ripple effects of those forms of oppression that still negatively impact women generally, and black women in particular. That said, though, I think that this kind of like this view that usually stems from black feminism, that one of the best ways for a woman to declare or assert her autonomy is to be as sexually promiscuous as possible, is just misguided. One of the biggest reasons why it's misguided is because these women are still operating in a society that, even by their own admission, they claim is male dominated. One, two, even if that weren't true, they still open up themselves to various forms of sexual exploitation. And what's really sad and pernicious about that is that these women willingly put themselves in positions to be sexually exploited for the benefit of all kinds of people, mostly men, by the way, but all kinds of people, even other women. And they even participate actively in kind of recruiting other women to this kind of thing under the false pretense of liberating themselves. So they think that they're doing God's work by liberating women, when really what they're doing is recruiting women into a system that exploits them for sexual purposes, or really for economic purposes. But one of the things that's instrumental in the economic gain is the sexual exploitation. Now, you do have women who have more say over it. You have your sex workers, your porn stars, you have your strippers, and they have more say over the money that they make, but they're still beholden to a bunch of people that are making decisions that implicate their ends and their funds. The porn stars are still beholden to producers, the makers of their websites that distribute the content. A lot of these porn stars don't even own their own movies that they star in, like etc. Like and you can blame it on capitalism if you want to, but to me that's a scapegoat, because you can't be conscientious enough to recognize that there are forms of oppression that negatively impact women on the one hand, and that's kind of like part and parcel of what you're trying to upend with your sexual liberation, and then turn a naive blind eye to the ways in which people are actually leveraging that sentiment for their own sexual and economic gain. Like you got to be you got to be able to see that, and so that's just scratching the surface of a critique that I give for this kind of thing. However, I do understand the sentiment of wanting for women to be on an equal playing field in terms of them having equal say in their own sexuality and the ways with which they move with respect to their own bodies and their own bodily autonomy. I get that. Part that discourse is actually implicated in the abortion debate in a fundamental way. I get that. So the feminists are not wrong to point out that dynamic. It's not a trivial thing. But there are better things that a woman could do with respect to her body than flaunt it and for the purposes of making money. But I mean, I guess that's for her to decide. But that's kind of I think that kind of epitomizes the naivete of the mantra "my body, my choice," because it is possible for a person to make stupid decisions with respect to their own body. And you can take a libertarian approach and be like, "Hey, that's on them, and they got to reap the consequences of that." And I kind of understand that, but like there's like an objectivity to the sense in which people can do objectively bad things or wrong things with respect to their own body, and that's the thing that I think that people left of center won't ever contend with. They can't seem to grasp the concept that you can have a moral duty with respect to yourself, that you in layman's terms owe it to yourself to not behave in certain ways. They dismiss that as respectability politics, but I think that that's naive. And some of them are starting to realize a little too late that the duty to respect oneself does not have to be couched in religious terms and religiosity. That's not the only way to understand it. That's one way to understand it, but that's not the only way to understand it. You can understand it purely on rational grounds. Like I owe it to myself to not take on a whole bunch of horrible eating habits whereby I'm going to be fat and overweight and stuff like that, because I ultimately make the decisions with respect to my body, and so I have to take on the responsibility of recognizing the natural consequences of the decisions that I make. And so when it comes to something as innocuous as what foods I choose to eat, right? Like I owe it to myself not to be eating candy and fatty foods and processed foods and things like that on a regular basis. I owe it to myself. And to not do that from a libertarian's point of view, it's like, well, hands off, that's your decision. But it's like, no, I'm there's a moral failure of sorts there, because I ought not do those things, yet I'm choosing to do them anyway, at least potentially. Now, I come from a kind of Kantian deontological framework. If you're not coming from that kind of a perspective, then there are other frameworks from which you can argue that there is no such thing as a duty to oneself. But I do think that it is possible for a person to violate with respect to their own personhood moral duties, moral obligations with respect to oneself. I do believe in that. That's one of the things that I get from my reading of Kant that makes a lot of sense, and that was one of the things that attracted me to Kant as a philosopher, as a philosophy major, let's say UCLA. All right, but coming back to this, because I don't want to get too heavy with the philosophy. I get what Trina's going for. I get what Saucy Santana, and with Saucy Santana, there's also the discourse on LGBTQ representation, particularly in hip hop, particularly in the Black community, and these are places where LGBTQ representation has been scarce because of open hostility in our community to them, and so I get that there's a kind of added layer there in terms of Saucy Santana as an artist generally, but in the context of this, the kind of unapologetic display of what I think is approximating a kind of inclusive version of sex positivity, where it's not just black women who are cis and straight, but it's LGBTQ members of the black community as well, who may or may not be cis, who may or may not be straight. It's supposed to be a kind of inclusive thing, and ultimately, I think that the naive message here is that voting is attractive, or participating in the vote, doing your civic duty is attractive, and therefore, um, you ought to do it. And if you don't do it, then you don't get no love. So I get the simple idea, and again, the thing that I would extract that I agree with is people should vote. I think black people should vote. I think black people in general should participate in the voting process. Now, I don't think it's sacred in the way that I've heard a lot of people talk about. Like, you have to vote like it's the end of the world. It's like, I don't know, man, because like any particular vote is not that impactful. It's kind of the nature of voting. I've abstained from voting. Notably in 2016, I didn't vote in that election because I thought that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were bowls of shit, and I didn't want to participate in a process that erected those two as the only two viable options for for the highest political office in the land. I was very resentful of that. That's me. But I got a lot of flack on Facebook because people were trying to shame me for not voting. And I was just like, why though? Like motherfuckers was acting like me not voting was somehow going to cause some kind of catastrophe, and that shit never made no sense. So I'm not on board with that. But in general, I think that black people should be aware politically, and they should politic, and they should be actively involved in it. As a good rule of thumb, I do think that there's some kind of civic or moral failure if you don't participate at all ever, and if you just kind of ignore the political process and don't participate in it, or don't even make yourself aware of anything politically at all. I think we need to do a lot less of that in our community for sure. But the irony here is that there are so many ways in which this is arguably a form of exploitation of black people in and of itself, even though it's presenting itself as somehow empowering the black people. And that is the biggest irony of this that I can muster, like that I realize. I'm just like promoting. First of all, why is it that this overt sexualization of the duty to participate in the political process is the go-to? Why is that the default? Like like why? Like I get that sex sells, and so that might be a big part of the rationale here. And I get that in my community, my people are big on a lot of um, titillating, emotionally affirming, and hedonistic things. From from doing Molly and Percocet, to smoking weed, to having sex, to going out and having a good time, to twerking to music, all of that kind of stuff. Eating good food. A lot of the food's unhealthy for us. So there's a lot of, and I participated in a lot of that stuff too, truth be told. I'm not Molly and Percocet though, but like I've smoked weed before, I've drank alcohol before, I've gone out and danced in provocative ways at the club, and I've spent money I didn't have to try to feel like I was balling when I wasn't. I've bought really expensive clothes that I didn't need. I've sung inappropriate rap songs at the top of my lungs, saying all the curse words. So I get it. I've eaten all of the unhealthy foods. I still eat them. That's actually my biggest vice is I eat a lot of unhealthy shit I shouldn't be eating. So I'm not holier than thou on this, but like there's something self-defeating about promoting a lot of these things that have a bunch of readily identifiable negative consequences for our people as a whole. And promoting it because they're culturally salient in certain ways, with a blatant disregard for the negative political ramifications that it can have in an overtly political message is ironic as fuck to me. And so like it's just really weird, and like proselytizing this kind of free love and stuff that primes people, particularly young black women, for being sexually exploited in various different ways, for becoming the new video host, for etc. Like that's interesting to me. That there's not there's not more talk about that. Um, that said, let me try to steel man the left though, because I think I can do it somewhat of a better way. I again, the core that I actually do agree with, that I think makes the most sense here, is that we want to inculcate in our community um, active participation in the voting process. Particularly if you're left of center and you're really gung ho about progressive politics, and you recognize that the black vote is very, very crucial to the Democrats winning at a time where a lot of progressives feel like Democrats really, really need to win, and it's not looking like they're going to win, particularly around things that are high stakes for the progressives, like the abortion issue, which is not going their way. The recent overturning of Roe v. Wade and pushing it back to the states is something that is a major L from the point of view of progressives. I think that they recognize this. They're angry about it, and they're trying to mobilize people to get to the polls in order to, in some sense, solve it, fix it, from whatever their progressive standards are. I think they want to make abortion legal everywhere. It seems like a lot of them want to do it all the way to the point of birth. I'm not going to get into an abortion debate right now, although I'll probably do another segment on it. But like that's one of the high stakes things that are at stake. Another one might be climate change from the point of view of progressives. Um, and as long as the Democrats are not in power, they're not going to be able to get the things that they want done. Another one might be UBI, or at least a $15 minimum wage. Um, Changing laws with respect to marijuana, and getting people who have been put in prison behind illegal possession of marijuana out of prison. Biden kind of took a step in that direction recently. I'm going to do a segment on that later. These are some examples of the kinds of things that progressives want. And so it's really important from the point of view of anybody on any side of the political spectrum, but especially progressives who seem to be they look like they're about to take a thrashing in the midterms, that we really, really, really need to get people out to vote. Another issue that progressives claim is a really big high stakes issue is, we got to save our democracy from the no good, very bad, evil Republicans who are trying to keep black people from voting by requiring ID or some shit. I don't fully understand the logic there, but apparently there's a bunch of nefarious shit that Republicans are doing to keep black people from voting. But like, what's weird is a lot of black people don't vote not because of something the Republicans do. A lot of black people don't vote because they just don't fucking vote, which actually is the impetus for having videos like this, is to kind of like get black people to vote. You want black people to vote a lot. You can proselytize a narrative that the no good, very bad, evil Republicans, as the progressives think of them, are trying to bring us back to the Jim Crow South and shit, or some shit, and like keep black people from voting because they know that they can't get their their evil racist policies to pass if the black people show up to the polls. I guess I mean, I do think that there's genuine disagreement between the Republicans and a lot of black people who lean left of center on a lot of different policy positions. And if Republicans had their way, they would want to pass a lot of things. I don't know that Republicans are actively trying to keep black people from voting, though, but that's the narrative. Stacey Abrams is one of the biggest proselytizers of this narrative, and a whole bunch of other people who are prominent in the black community and on TV and in the media are saying this as well. I've looked into it. I haven't seen much evidence of it whatsoever, but like, I guess, I mean, so let's just assume for the sake of argument that that's happening on some level. Maybe it's just a little teensy bit, but whatever. It's happening in places like Georgia and places like Texas and places like Florida, where the no good, very bad, evil Republicans run things. Okay, I guess. I mean, maybe, but like, I don't know that it's significant enough to like overturn vote like elections, but that seems to be the contention, is that it's just enough to overturn elections in the favor of Republicans, and then give them plausible deniability, right? So it's this kind of conspiracy theory. Now, people left of center don't usually refer to these kinds of things as conspiracy theories, because they're fundamentally, they think it's just true, though. It's like, all right, but like, it is a conspiracy theory. Some conspiracy theories are true, to be fair, but like, it is a conspiracy theory. And it's just as dubious as the conspiracy theory that the election in 2020 was stolen. But leftists don't like to think about it in those terms, because fundamentally their contention is it's the no good, very bad, evil Republicans who are always the ones up to no good, and their side is noble or some shit. It's like, okay, you say so. Both sides actually are capable of nefarious shit. This is well documented, and even now, contemporarily in 2022, not just in the past. But yeah, going back to the subject proper, though, I don't I think the cringiness of this music video is so obvious and so like it's like undeniable, but a lot of people won't get into like why it's cringy, like get into the subliminal messaging of this, and like the kind of low expectations that are latent in this. The way to appeal to the Black community is by overt appeals text and hip hop music. That's what moves us politically. And like, I don't know, man. I don't have such a low view of my people. I think that there are ways to motivate my people to vote and to pay attention that go beyond titillation and appeals to hedonism in various different ways. Um, I get the cultural salience of these things, and so maybe that's what the attempt is to appeal to the cultural salience of hip hop music and the cultural salience of artists like Trina, who do have a lot of pull socially in the Black community. I think that's probably the goal, but the cost of that is that it reinforces or reinculcates, uh, I think not only harmful stereotypes, but like harmful cultural norms that have a whole bunch of toxicity in our community, and in the long run, I don't think are going to serve us all that well. Um, so that's one of my biggest criticisms of it, and I tried to articulate it as clearly as possible. Maybe it was really long winded,